chapter 11. Daniel chapter 11. Now, I think I mentioned this last week. We are going to look a little bit into chapter 12. Not going to finish it by any means, but we're going to look at first few verses, because really it should go with this prophecy here in chapter 11. The chapter breaks really from 10 into 11 and 11 into 12 are kind of unfortunate. They're not in the best spot, but Daniel chapter 11, starting in verse 36. Now, the prophecy that we've been seeing, we've been looking, going back and forth between the kings of the north, the kings of the south, which up to this point, and that'll make sense here in a second, up to this point have been talking about the dynastic lines of Syria and Egypt around the time of Greece on into the beginning of the Roman dominance. And so here we pick it up in verse 36. This is after the time of Antiochus Epiphanes. And so it says, "And the king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and he shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any god, for he shall magnify himself above all. But in his estate shall he honor the God of forces, and a God who is his fathers knew not, shall he honor with gold, silver, precious stones, and pleasant things. Thus shall he do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south push at him, and the king of the north shall come against him like a whirlwind, with chariots, with horsemen, and with many ships. And he shall enter into the countries, and shall overflow and pass over. And he shall enter also into the glorious land, and many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom, Moab, and the chief of the children of Ammon. And he shall stretch forth his hand upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. But he shall have power over the treasures of gold and of silver, and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and the Ethiopians shall be at his steps. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Therefore he shall go forth with great fury to destroy, and utterly to make away many. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain, yet he shall come to his end, and none shall help him." And then the first three verses of chapter 12. "And at that time shall Michael stand up, the great prince, which standeth for the children of thy people. And there shall be a time of trouble, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And at that time thy people shall be delivered, every one that shall be found written in the book. And many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake, some to everlasting life, and some to shame and everlasting contempt. And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever." And so, like I said, I kind of got a lot to get through here. But at verse 36, there is, I believe, a definite break. We're seeing a definite break between verse 35 and verse 36. And you see this at the end of verse 35. At the end of verse 35, it says, "Even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed." And so up to verse 35, as we have seen over the past 2 weeks, we have had a detailed historical accuracy to the level which we don't really see almost anywhere in the world. And so this has, and no historian, no liberal scholar, everybody is in agreement up till verse 36. Through verse 35, we can pinpoint exactly who these things are talking about. We can pinpoint the exact events that they're prophesying without question. And then we get to verse 36 and things change. Because now we have a break. And so you're going to have two separate groups. And so you have a group of which I'm a part of that would say from verse 36 on, the prophecy is now switched from speaking of Antiochus Epiphanes, which we saw at the end of last week, and we've now moved forward and we're now talking about the Antichrist. That's where I would stand on that. I'll talk more about that in just a second. And then there's another group that says, no, he's still talking about Antiochus Epiphanes. But the problem, and there's a big problem with this, the problem is that the historical accuracy that has existed through verse 35, if this is still talking about Antiochus Epiphanes, ceases. Because he does not do the things that we read about from verse 36 on. And so even the most stringent scholar on this that would say, yes, everything through verse 35 has been or has taken place exactly as it is stated. The liberal scholars, they don't want to talk about prophetic scriptures. They don't like prophetic scriptures. And so they'll say, no, he's still talking about Antiochus, just he's not getting things accurate now. Or some of them say, no, he's just speaking hyperbolic. He's speaking hyperbolically to show how evil he was, which doesn't really make sense. And so for whatever reason, they have to contend with the fact that the first 35 verses pinpoint accuracy on every detail. And then from verse 36 on, vastly different. And so it just makes more sense. And we've already seen this in the book of Daniel. It just makes more sense to understand that he has now moved forward, as he just told us at the end of verse 35, and we see it again in this section, to the time of the end, and that Antiochus stands as a foreshadow, a picture of what the Antichrist is going to be. Antiochus Epiphanes stood in part what the Antichrist will be in whole. I think you could say the same thing for Nero. Nero stood in part for what the Antichrist will be in whole. These men stood as pictures, foreshadows of what he would ultimately come and do, outshadowing them in the global nature of his particular kingdom. And so with that in mind, again, verse 36 here, we're pushed forward in time, forward even to us. All of this has been forward to Daniel, but now we're forward even to us today. And so, as I said, in the verse 35, you see, even to the time of the end. And so here at the time of the end, we're introduced to a new king. And also notice here at verse 36, it just says the king. It doesn't say the king of the north, it doesn't say the king of the south, just the king. Right? And so, again, I see this as a different individual. And so I believe this to be the Antichrist. And so we begin here in verses 36, the first couple of verses here, with the king's religious ideology. The Antichrist religious ideology. He will do according to his will. Now, again, I could say this almost every phrase. Already I can stop and say, this isn't Antiochus. Did he do according to his will? A lot of the time he did, but he was also defeated. He was also stopped. There was also a time where he was trying to conquer Egypt, and the Romans stepped in and said, no, you're not going to do that. And he was defeated, and he had to crawl back to Syria as a defeated man. Did he do all his will? No, absolutely not. But this man will. He will do according to his will. He will exalt himself. He will magnify himself above every god. He will speak marvelous things against the God of gods. He shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. That's an important phrase. For that is determined shall be done. Again, this is very much in keeping with the entire theme of the book of Daniel. All of these things that Daniel has talked about, and it's no different with the Antichrist, it's no different with the end times, are determined by God. These times are determined by God. Right? No king is stepping beyond the time, the power, the authority to which God has granted him. Right? God he's determined the times. He's determined the season. He has determined the boundary of every nation. He has determined all of these things. And again, it's no different with the Antichrist. And so he will prosper till the indignation. This time of indignation is over. It's already been proclaimed by God to happen. It's been proclaimed by God how it's going to happen. That man will have his day, but it will be a day confined by the sovereign will of God. And so this man, he will proclaim himself as God. He will speak against the God of gods, as he says there. You can read this in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. It says the same thing there. However, it will all be under, as I said, the sovereign will of the very God that he's speaking against. And so he tries to make himself to be something that he's simply not. Furthermore, we read on. He will not regard, and these two statements here are, I don't want to say controversial, I'll say misunderstood. He will not regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. Well, already I can just step in and say again, this is not Antiochus. We've already talked about this. Antiochus did not ever try to proclaim himself the God of gods. Antiochus said, no, I want you to worship the Greek gods. When he goes to the temple in Israel and he desecrates the temple, he doesn't set up a statue of Antiochus. He sets up a statue of Zeus because he wanted everyone to worship the Greek gods. He doesn't want them to worship him necessarily. He wanted them to worship the Greek gods. He wanted them to fall in line with Greek ideology, with Greek culture, with Greek religion. And so again, this is not reminiscent or descriptive at all of Antiochus Epiphanes. And so here, again, the Antichrist, he's going to magnify himself above all. Now, these two phrases, one of them I put in here, the other one, I'll just give you a quick note on that. Where it says he does not regard the God of his fathers. The word God there is the Hebrew word Elohim. This is not the Hebrew word Yahweh, meaning Elohim is a very generic title. It's a very generic word. It can be talking about God, not necessarily talking about God. And so when it says that he does not regard the God of his fathers, some people say, well, obviously, because the term or the phrase God of his fathers is used several times in relation to Jews. And so a lot of people will say, well, this proves that the Antichrist is going to be a Jew. My statement on that is it doesn't necessarily state that. He could be, but he doesn't have to be. We do know from chapter 9, when we discussed Daniel's 70 weeks, that there we are told that he will be of Roman descent. Just quickly, I think it's verse 26. In the middle of verse 26, he says, and the people of the prince that shall come. The prince that shall come is the Antichrist. And the people of him shall come and destroy the sanctuary. Well, we've already talked about that being fulfilled in 70 AD. 70 AD, who destroyed the sanctuary? The Romans. And he is of those people. And so he will be in some way of Roman descent. Now, could he be a Roman Jew? Yes, he could be. This verse does not necessitate him being a Jew, is all I want to say about that. Some people would say it does. And then you get that phrase, the desire of women. He does not regard the desire of women. This could be as simple as saying he's going to be a homosexual man. We are to the point in our society where it's not out of the question at all that somebody who is a homosexual could raise to this kind of a level. Probably 20, 30 years ago, nobody would have thought maybe that could have happened. Obviously, we're to the point now where that's not out of the bounds of reality at all. However, I'll say this, I don't think that's what this phrase is talking about. Now again, it could be a both thing. He could be a homosexual plus. When it says the desire of women, this was a very typical Hebrew phrase. The desire of women in the Old Testament and really on into the New, at least as far as the times, not necessarily in the Bible itself, but in rabbinical writings and things like that, they talked about the desire of women. And the desire of women for Jewish women was to be the mother of the Messiah. That is why Mary is considered so blessed in the New Testament, is because she got to have the desire of women fulfilled in her life. And so this was a common Jewish phrase. The desire of women was to be the mother of the Messiah. And so he's not going to regard the woman's desire. Well, what is the woman's desire? The Messiah. He's not going to regard the Messiah. He's going to speak against the Messiah. I do think that is what this in reference to. Now, again, maybe it's both. Maybe it's a both and kind of thing. But again, it doesn't necessitate or necessarily say that this man is going to be a homosexual, possibly. But the biggest takeaway from this, again, there's religious ideology. He puts down everybody else, sets himself up as God. This is within keeping with everything else the Bible tells us about the Antichrist. You can go read 2 Thessalonians, you can go read Revelation chapter 13. All of that is there. And so he will demand worship as God, but he himself will honor the God of forces. The God of forces. This is a military term. And so, in other words, he's going to proclaim himself as God, but the only God he really believes in is the God of war. And I'm not talking about like the personification of war, like Ares or some kind of mythological figure like that. I'm saying he worships literal warfare, shedding blood, conquering nations. That's going to be this man's God. And he's going to do anything, and he's going to spend anything to bring about global domination. And he's going to be successful in this. And this is the thing about the Antichrist. Again, going back to chapter 9, we know he's going to sign a covenant with the people of Israel for 7 years. And for the first half of the tribulation, the Antichrist is going to be the man to do what nobody else has been able to do. For 3.5 years, again, roughly, maybe not exactly, but for 3.5 years, this man is actually going to bring peace to the Middle East. Now, it's a false peace, and it won't be a lasting peace, but he's going to do it. And he's going to put down with severity anybody who tries to break that peace. Anybody who tries to come against the Israelites. Now, all of it is just kind of a way to try and get them on his side. But nevertheless, he's going to do it. He will be successful in this. He is going to have global domination. And so in this particular quest, it says that he shall cause them to rule over many, and he will divide the land for gain. And again, we've already talked about this in Daniel a couple of times. It's in Revelation chapter 17, where we've talked about how the Antichrist is going to rule over kind of a breakdown of 10 kings, 10 kingdoms. The entire world is going to be broken up into these 10 kingdoms, over which the Antichrist will reign over all of that. I won't rehash all that. We've talked about that already. But then, almost as a reminder, we are told again that all of this takes place at the time of the end, at the beginning of verse 40. And at the time of the end shall the king of the south. And so here we're brought in some familiar language. And so there's going to be rebellion. Now, when we talk about the global domination wherewith he overtakes the world, we should never take away from that every single individual in the world is simply going to fall in line and do exactly what he says. There's going to be pushback. I mean, this is going to take place in the real world, right? I mean, you can imagine somebody with global domination right now, global dominion. There would be pushback against that. I'm not even talking about just by Christians, right? There will be other unredeemed people who will want what? Well, I want his position. I want the power that he has. And so they might not care at all his religion. They might not care at all his personal life. They might not care how wicked of a man he is. They just want the power that he has. And so there's going to be pushback. There's going to be rebellion. This is going to take place. And so he references this particular rebellion taking place by both the king of the south and the king of the north. Now, again, we're at the time of the end now. So this doesn't necessarily mean only Egypt, only Syria. Remember, south and north, through this whole passage, south and north has been in relation to Israel, right? Because this is who the prophecy is mainly concerning. And so a nation south of Israel, a nation north of Israel. This could be the battle that Ezekiel references with Gog and Magog and what we would say is modern-day Russia. This could be that. Other people, I lean more to the fact that happens later on. But some of these battles that are mentioned taking place in and around the time of the tribulation, it's very, very difficult to really put down with pinpoint accuracy exactly when these things take place. Some of them are set in stone. We get that, Armageddon. We know when that one happens. But some of these others, it's a little bit more difficult. But there will be a rebellion. And it could be a conglomeration of these two nations, south and north, coming against him. It could just be that, they happen to attack at the same time. But they're going to come against him. They're going to rebel against him. But at the end of verse 40, it says that he shall enter into the countries and shall overflow and pass over. Essentially, it's going to be put down very quickly and seemingly pretty easily. He's going to be victorious in this. And now the Antichrist is then going to respond with force of his own. And so he's going to move against these countries. He's going to move north. He's going to be victorious. He's going to move south. He's going to be victorious. And he goes, we're not told specifically what happens in the north, but we are told in the south he's going to move against Egypt. He's going to move against Libya. He's going to move against Ethiopia. And again, I'll just throw this in there. Antiochus never attacked Libya or Ethiopia. He never did that. And so he moves south. He's victorious. He soundly defeats the north. He soundly defeats Israel, we are told, because he moves into the glorious land. And so at this point, we're moving into, or at least getting close to, that midway point of the tribulation. And he defeats the south. And we're specifically told, or is it verse 41, that Edom, Moab, and the children of Ammon escape out of his hand. Well, that's because they're more east of the action. He's not moving that way. He's moving north. He's moving south to stop these rebellions happening against him. And so he now sits supreme in the glorious holy mountain. In other words, he has now situated himself in Israel. And so he has now set himself up on Mount Zion, of all places, and again, proclaiming that he is God. Not just he is the ruler of the world, not just he is the king of the earth, he is God. And you read Revelation chapter 13, and I'll say this is highly debated, but Revelation chapter 13 speaks about him receiving a deadly wound and recovering. Now, some people say that that is in reference to some kind of blow against him politically, that people thought, well, he'll never recover politically from this, and he does. And so some people think that's what it's in reference to. Other people think he will actually die and come back to life. I'm of the impression that he will be wounded. I don't think he's actually going to die, but I think he's going to make everybody think he did and make everybody think he resurrects because he's a counterfeit Christ, right? He doesn't do the things that Christ does, but he wants people to think he does the things that Christ does. But all of this is happening around this same time. And so now he's in Israel. He's reigning the world. Again, it's in the minds of those who are brainwashed by this guy as God himself in the flesh. And he is at the height of his power. And so at this particular time, we're told that this would be a time of trouble. It says, such as never was since there was a nation, even to that same time. And so now we've moved into what the Bible refers to as the Great Tribulation. So you have the tribulation, 7 years. You have the Great Tribulation, which is, again, maybe not exactly, but the second half. Maybe not the full 3.5 years, maybe a little bit less time than that. But the second half of the tribulation. And then we get to chapter 12, and the point of all this is that Israel is not without protection. And so here the angel has just told Daniel, things are bad, things are going to get worse, and you wait till we get to the end, and things are going to be worse than they ever have been in the history of mankind. And so all of that would disturb Daniel, obviously. It's disturbing now to think about the kinds of things that are going to take place. And so Daniel is seeing all this, and he's disturbed by this. And so the angel says, but Israel is not hopeless. They are not helpless. God is going to send not just an angel, he's going to send Michael. And he says at that time, Michael will stand up. And he's standing for the children of thy people. He's the protector of Israel. And again, there will come a time of trouble, unlike any other time. And then he says, and at that time thy people shall be delivered, everyone that shall be found written in the book. And so, again, there's so many things that could be said right now. The book of Revelation speaks of 144,000 Jews that are going to be sealed with in some manner. And they will be almost untouchable. They will be proclaiming the gospel. Myriads of people are going to get saved in the tribulation. It is going to be a time of not only global dominion by the Antichrist, but it is also going to be a time of gospel dominion, where the gospel is going out in ways that it never has before. And millions of people are going to be saved in the tribulation. But these 144,000 are going to be sealed. Jews are going to be protected. All of this is talked about. You can see in particular Revelation chapter 12, where we get a sense of all this. But Michael is going to be spearheading this. Michael, whether or not he's seen or not, I would say that he's probably not seen, but like angels typically do, working behind the scenes, but standing up for and protecting the people of Israel. And again, how he does this is not stated, but that's not the point. The angel's purpose in this isn't to tell him, hey, here's exactly what Michael is going to do. But no, the purpose is to say, Michael is for your people. Right? Things look bad. They are bad, but God's not done. Right? God is not rejected. God is not helpless on the throne. And so he stresses both the intense and severe nature of the persecution that's going to come. But despite its intensity, God had not forsaken his people, Israel. And I still believe that to be true today. Now, furthermore, and again, I'm trying to move quickly. I have a couple more things to get through today. For those who did die, verse 2, because it doesn't necessarily say that there won't be a single Jew who dies. It doesn't even necessarily say there won't be a single Jew who accepts Christ and dies. It doesn't say that that's not going to happen. Verse 2, it says, and many of them that sleep in the dust of the earth shall awake. Some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. So let me try to clarify some things very quickly. This is one of the forms of the deliverance that God is bringing to his people. Some of them will be delivered literally, physically. Again, go read Revelation chapter 12. It speaks of one of these instances. Some of them will have physical deliverance. Some of them won't. And some of them are going to die. Some of them are going to be martyred during the tribulation. But their deliverance still comes. Right? God is still going to deliver them. How? Because he doesn't leave them dead. He doesn't leave them in the earth. He resurrects them. All right? And so this is a deliverance that is promised to the Jewish people who accept Christ during this particular time. And so again, let me try to clarify a couple of things here quickly. So many of them sleep in the dust. They will awake, some to everlasting life, some to shame and everlasting contempt. When it comes to the resurrection, I'm talking about the resurrection of Christ. I'm talking about the resurrection of people. Right? There are different times when this takes place. Okay, so Christ was resurrected as the first fruits. After the resurrection of Christ, the resurrection of believers, you could say at one point is going to happen at the rapture. So you could say that that is a living resurrection, right? For those who are alive and remain, we will be caught up together with them in the clouds. And so it's kind of a living resurrection. And then beyond that, after the tribulation, before we move into the millennium. So after the tribulation, before Christ's millennial reign begins, there is a resurrection. There is a resurrection of Old Testament saints. There is a resurrection of tribulation saints. Church saints have already been raptured away, right? And so all of this is taking place after the tribulation. That's the resurrection that Daniel references here. After the millennium, there is a resurrection of what you might call the unredeemed. Okay, and so this, let me read for you in Revelation chapter 20. It says in verse 4, "And I saw thrones, and they sat upon them, and judgment was given unto them. And I saw the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus," that would be during the tribulation period, "the souls of them that were beheaded for the witness of Jesus and for the word of God, and which had not worshipped the beast, neither his image, neither had received his mark upon their foreheads or in their hands." And it says this, "And they lived and reigned with Christ 1,000 years." And so there was a resurrection of tribulation/Old Testament saints prior to the millennium. They're reigning with Christ during that time period. Verse 5, it says, "But the rest of the dead lived not again until the 1,000 years were finished." And it says, this is the first resurrection. Verse 6 says, "Blessed and holy is he that hath part in the first resurrection. On such the second death hath no power. But they shall be priests of God and of Christ, and shall reign with him 1,000 years." And so it speaks of the first resurrection. The first resurrection is the resurrection of saints prior to the millennium. The second resurrection is the resurrection of unredeemed peoples after the millennium. And at that particular point, that is a resurrection straight to judgment. Again, you can go read Revelation chapter 20. You resurrected at that point, you're going right to the great white throne judgment. And that is not a pretty scene there. And so lastly, verse 3 in chapter 12, "And they that be wise shall shine as the brightness of the firmament, and they that turn many to righteousness as the stars forever and ever." And so again, he's speaking now for comfort. He's given him a look over not only hundreds of years, but now thousands of years into the future. And it's been pretty bad. It's been negative. All of this is the kings of the north, the kings of the south fighting back and forth. As we talked about a couple of weeks ago, where is that fighting taking place? It's taking place in Israel. That's why this prophecy is being given. And then you move on into the tribulation period. What is happening in the tribulation period? By and large, persecution of Christians in general. Yes, I get that. But specifically of Israel, God's people. And so here, and he says this is going to be worse than any time in the history of humanity. And you think back about some of the things that humanity has gone through, and you understand how bold of a statement that is. And so here, again, he's told them all these terrible things. So you get to chapter 12, and it's like he needs a spark of hope. Daniel just needs, some comfort. And that's exactly what he does here to end the prophecy. And so he gives them hope. Michael is going to be there. Deliverance is going to come, whether that's physical or spiritual, and a resurrection. And by the way, when you talk about the resurrection, verse 3, it's going to be a glorious resurrection, a glorious future beyond Daniel, which you can even begin to comprehend. And so not only is their future secure, right, and that's a key thing, because here Daniel, right, captive, by this particular point, the decree has been given that they could go back, and barely anybody's gone back, right? And so the northern tribes, Israel, the northern 10 tribes, they were conquered and scattered. They didn't return. And so now the southern 2 tribes, they were conquered. They weren't scattered by the grace of God, given the opportunity to return to Israel, and by and large, they didn't. And so Daniel here is wondering, what's going to happen to my people? What's going to happen to Israel? What's going to happen? And so here he's told, the future is secure. Now, one thing you have to kind of build into this whole prophecy is that, yes, there's a lot of terrible things happening to Israel, but there's an Israel, right? I mean, terrible things can happen to a non-existent people. And so, yes, bad things are coming, but by the way, God has kept you through. Israel has existed. Israel remains to exist. And so their future was secure. And then once you get beyond the terrible, their future is secure in Christ and on into eternity. And so this was a comfort to Daniel. And so when you get into that eternity, they're going to blaze with the glory of God. And that's what you see there in verse 3. And so, as I said earlier, the Antichrist, he is going to have his day. He is going to reign supreme before a very short time. And so his time is temporary. But the day of the redeemed is both eternal and it is glorious. And so this is the ultimate purpose in this particular vision. Yes, to give some specificity, to give some ideas to what was coming, but ultimately to give comfort and hope to a man who has loved his Savior, loved his people, but because of the will of God, spent the vast majority of his life outside of his land serving other nations. And so God was really helping Daniel here and giving him some comfort. So we will finish up with the book of Daniel next week. And we've still some very interesting things to see. The vision itself isn't over. There's kind of a, I guess you could call it an epilogue at the end of chapter 12. So we still have some interesting things to see, but by and large, we've got the bulk of it behind us. So